Okay, let's start again. So this is The Shift by Dr. Wayne Dyer. We are on chapter 3, page 46 of the book and page 52 of the PDF. We are at a belief in unity replaces a belief in separation. Shivangla, you can take it from this.
A belief in unity replaces our belief in separation. Ego has long insisted that we are separate from everyone else and therefore special. The obstinate conviction in separateness has meant that we constantly compare ourselves with each other and compete for what we desire.
So now,
We've
now
learned
in the movie, if you saw the movie, it was that guy, that real estate developer, that was operating in this concept.
we've learned to fight and even go to war if necessary to sustain that notion. Conflict is a necessary part of ego's belief in separation, and the need to dominate and destroy others is all part and parcel of the mindset.
So now, if you observed in the movie, the guy, he was developing a real estate project, and there was a tree in that real estate project, and people were objecting that that tree should not be cut. But he said that if that tree is not cut, then I'm going to lose money. Who's going to pay for it? So he was not interested in creating unity. The other thing was, he was attending that charity for his own purpose. He was not attending it for actually being there as a donor or as a part to create value over there. He was just there because another guy who he needed to be in touch with was over there. But as the movie progressed, his concept and his conceptualization changed from being separate to unity consciousness, and then he wrote a check. And when he wrote the check, he gave it to the owner. He didn't even hand it in himself. Why? Because now he realized that his name was not so important. Okay, so now he shifted from being operating from the ego, which is operating in separateness, in selfishness, to wholeness.
As we head back to our fromness, a sense of oneness begins replacing separateness. Our source of being tells us that we are all connected, so we start feeling less competitive. Our desire to dominate is replaced by compassion, and controlling others is no longer appealing.
So again, this is also beautiful. Now he was totally controlling his wife. Okay, he wanted her to behave in a particular way. But then as soon as he shifted, then he let go. And then he started understanding what is her happiness rather than just looking at what he wanted. So the desire to dominate starts getting uh, repelled.
The language of spirit instructs us, in the language of the Tao Te Ching, to never think of conquering others by force. Whatever strains with force will soon decay. It is not attuned to the way.
Okay, so whenever you are looking at operating with force, okay, instead of power, so when you're operating out of force, you're always on the left side of the grid. You're never on the right side of the grid. When you operate with power, that is when you shift to the right side of the grid. And anything that operates or comes about from the left side of the grid, the entropy in that is high, always the highest. So the decay will always be faster.
All conflicts, be they in our personal life or the larger world, stem from heading away from our source of being.
Now this is again important. We have come here with a life path. We've come here to achieve certain things. And now whenever we are shifting from that life path, that is when resistance, conflict, all these things start coming in our life. Our perspective, when it shifts and it brings us back into the path, then we find that the synchronicity starts falling in place and everything starts happening. Whenever that synchronicity is not there, that feel of ease is not there, that means we are in conflict and we are in resistance. So we are off the life path. And the universe will keep sending us messages that you're off the life path by these resistance, these small roadblocks, these small bumps in the road that will come into our lives.
Thanks to its belief in separation, the ego steers us towards force rather than empowerment. The words of Jesus are once again in harmony with the ancient Tao. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
So anyone who's operating in equanimity, who's peaceful within, automatically will create peace without. So the less in resistance we are, the more in the flow we are, we automatically become healers. We automatically become the chosen ones. Why? Because we are in the flow.
One of the characteristics in the shift is completely tuned into his oneness with others. His name is Joe, and it's initially unclear whether he's a janitor, gardener, or perhaps a waiter. But it's obvious that his ego is unpretentious. He functions in a calm, sensitive, and sincerely joyful manner in service to all the guests at the resort. Meaning and purpose have replaced any need for ambition and control for Joe. Throughout the film, he illustrates the kind of behavior that occurs when we are aware of the oneness that unites us.
So again, Joe, although he was the owner of the resort, he was doing everything and he was loving what he did. He was doing it full of heartfulness. He was doing it because he enjoyed doing it. It was not a burden for him. It was a pleasure. It was not a pain for him. He really had a great time while doing whatever he was doing. So he was totally jacked into the flow. And everywhere he went, he created harmony.
We begin realizing that we're connected in spirit to everything we perceive to be missing from our life. During the morning of life, ego has insisted that we are separate from everything that's missing in our life and that we must chase our desires. It pushes us to strive, struggle, fight, work hard, and apply a determinedly ambitious approach to life. It insists that this is how we succeed in being considered successful by our peers. Convinced that we are separate, we conclude that what's missing is due to our separateness. Yet we come from a oneness where there is no such thing. Our source of being gently reminds us that we are connected to everything, so we must be connected to what we think is missing.
So again, the universe will provide everything that is required for our growth to us at every moment in time. Whatever we need, we really have. Okay, that's something which is a given. The when we perceive we don't have something, then it is actually not required at that moment in time, because we are connected to the whole. Everything is always available to us. It's just that we, in because of the ego, create this separateness. And when we really need something, and if we are in that altered state of consciousness, then whatever we require will 100% manifest in our lives. There's no two ways about that.
This chapter emphasizes that we shift or move back to something ego is unfamiliar with. The Tao teaching reminds us that the great Tao is omnipresent, which means that there is no place it is not. And Jesus proclaims, "The kingdom of God is among you." Ego, on the other hand, defines separateness as separation from everything we can't grasp with our senses.
So ego operates in the materialistic side of things, whereas oneness operates in the spiritualistic side of things. Ego is on the left side of the grid and wholeness is on the right side of the grid. Now we are all connected with everything, and there is no place where that everything is not. So everything is everywhere and everything is nowhere. It's just a matter of perception at the end of the day.
When we head back in the direction of where we reconnect to our source of being, the journey is typified by an alignment in which we think and act like the Tao that flows everywhere. The Tao that covers all creatures like the sky but does not dominate them. All things return to it as their home, but it does not lord it over them.
So again, ultimately we are part of that source, that infinite infinity. And if we are part of that infinity, then we are also technically infinity. Now, the ultimate aim for us is again to reunite with that infinity. The only point here is that we don't realize that we are the infinity. So when we start increasing our bandwidth, then we start realizing our perception starts to expand, our sense of awareness starts to expand, our state of being starts to expand. That is when we start going closer to that oneness. And the more we do it, the more attention we pay to it, because energy flows where attention is, right? So whatever you are attentive about, that is where the energy will flow. So where whatever you are connecting with, that is what will take you into an altered state. So focus of attention and awareness is the key to this transition.
I'm sorry, can you just switch on the Geo? My it's showing internet is unstable.
Just one second. Just hold on, I'll come and give it to
Being. The journey is typified by an alignment in which we think and act like the Tao that flows everywhere. The Tao that covers all creatures like the sky but does not dominate them. All things return to it as their home, but it does not lord it over them. As we move in this direction, there is no possibility of shortage or lack. We become content and grateful for all that we have.
you. So as soon as you connect into the flow, okay, you will be content with what you have. Now, if you're content with what you have, then the concept of lack goes out of the window. Because if I'm happy with what I have, then I'm not craving for anything more. And ultimately, that is what happiness is all about. Gratitude for what you have. When I go for vastu visits to people's houses, there is one frequency that we look at. If that frequency is out of sync, that means the people are not grateful for what they have. Now, if I am not grateful for what I have, I will never get what I want, because what what I want, the foundation of that is what I have. So if I'm not grateful for what I have, I've kicked out the foundation. Now, if the foundation is only there, not there, then naturally I will not get what I want. So having gratitude for whatever we have, even if it is very little compared to someone else, but we should be grateful that we have it. Because if we didn't have it, then we won't have it, right? So gratitude becomes very, very important.
We begin trusting the wisdom that created us. Ego constantly dissuades us from believing in our divinity, insisting that we are separate from God. Our source of being, however, tells us that we are an inseparable piece of God. If we believe, as Jesus taught, that I and the Father are one, then there would be no need for the ego.
So ultimately, what is happening? That separateness that we've created with ourselves, the moment we start dissolving that, we connect with the whole. Okay, and when we connect with the Father and me are one. So we are actually, जो अपने गीता वगैरह में आता है, that aham brahmasmi, we are that. It's just that we don't know it. Why? Because number one, intellectually you may understand it, but experientially we have not yet experienced it. The moment we start experiencing it experientially, that is when the transitions will start taking place. And that is the beauty of the Monroe programs. There was a research done that the real shifts in anyone's life comes in the Monroe. They did a big survey of all the Monroe participants, and the maximum shifts come after they have attended 2 of the 6-day programs. Now, having said that, we've been at it for the last 100 and something days. So definitely people may be experiencing certain shifts in their life.
As we embark on our return trip, we see the folly of continuing to believe that our source of being could ever be separate from us. We know that we are not distinct, fearful creatures who are dependent on a moody and sometimes malevolent God for our sustenance. We begin to see ourselves as Lao Tzu describes, carrying body and soul and embracing the one. We abandon the material ego focus and can no longer see ourselves as separate from God.
So once you've touched that state of consciousness, it will alter you forever. This happens in most cases when people have NDEs. There's a list of things, I think 15 or 16 things that indicate whether you've had an out of body experience or not. And I would say 80 to 90% of the NDEers actually see a tremendous shift in the way that they are living life after the NDE. NDE means near death experience.
As we become one with our source, we begin the realignment process, thinking and contemplating more like God. We gain the wisdom necessary to understand these words written by Thomas Troward. If you contemplate with thoughts that match originating spirit, you have the same power as originating spirit. This idea is anathema to the ego, but the wholeness, the oneness that we truly are is revealed as we begin trusting the wisdom that created us.
So again, whatever frequency you are vibrating at, that is what will come into your life. It's all a matter of resonance. So if I'm vibrating at that frequency of that divine essence, then it implies that I have all the characteristics of that particular divine essence. So that's why when we go into the presence of these sages, the Rishi Munis, etc., automatically we also start, our vibratory frequency also starts to get speed up. Okay, and we start resonating with them, so I will always feel a sense of calm. This happens in places also. There are some places which have a very, very powerful resonant frequency. That's why in our culture we used to visit the temples. The idea was you visited the temple in the morning. The structure of the temple was made in such a way that it put you into resonance, it put you into equilibrium with it. Then you did work the whole day, and again in the evening you went there, recharged, and then went to the house, so that you were cleansed of whatever burden, whatever thoughts, etc., that you had during the day. They were cleansed, and then you went home. This was the concept of doing the arti in the morning and arti in the evening. Okay, so you're resonating with that force.
What to expect as we change the direction of our life? As with anything new, shifting from the morning of life into the afternoon and then evening will produce some surprising situations. This new direction, from ambition to meaning, is often accompanied by an unexpected event.
So the unexpected event is something transcendental. Some incident will take place in your life which will make you pay attention, and then that's when the shift in consciousness takes place.
I found that every spiritual advance I've made was preceded by some sort of a fall in fact. It's almost a universal law that a fall of some kind precedes a major shift.
Okay, so when do we remember the divine? Whenever we are in trouble. Okay, so basically what he's saying here is that any kind of a shift is preceded by a total depletion, and when a person is totally depleted, that is when a person surrenders. So when you surrender, that is when that shift in consciousness takes place.
A fall can be an embarrassing event that reveals the exaggerated influence ego has been allowed to play in one's life, which certainly happened to me when I was prompted to end my association with alcohol. Other kinds of falls may involve an accident, a fire that destroys all the stuff we worked so hard to accumulate, an illness, a failed relationship, a death or injury that causes deep sorrow, an abandonment, a serious addiction, a business failure, a bankruptcy, or the like. These low points actually provide the energy needed to make a shift in direction away from an ego-driven life to one full of purpose.
So whenever we have a fall, right, we find that these systems that we were using have not worked. So naturally, if something has not worked, we look for an alternate, and that is when the shift comes. So that's why these falls are very good in any kind of a circuit. Many times when I go to certain clients and they say that we are going through bad time, bad time, bad time. I said, okay, what bad time? So they've had a very, very good time, and now their profitability or their sales is starting to come down. I said, okay, you had a bumper time, but now it's coming down. So it is a time to recheck. When you're doing very well, you start putting on flab, you start putting on extra expenses, you start, taking things for granted. When the fall comes, that is when you start paying attention to the detail. You start putting systems in place, you start putting controls in place, so you make the organization leaner and thinner. Okay, the same thing happens with our lives also. Whenever we have a downfall, that is the time when we relook our lives. What is important in our life, what is not important in our life? We get rid of the stuff which is not important, and that is when the shift comes. So the low points actually are very, very important in creating these shifts in our lives.
When I was in high school, I was the high jumper on the boys' track team. In order to propel myself over the bar, I'd approach the high jump pit and get down as low as I could. In the process of getting down so low, I was creating the position necessary to propel myself high enough to sail over the bar.
Okay, so now this is again important, that today if I want to jump up, first I have to go down. It's like a trampoline, right? The higher you want to jump, the deeper you have to go into the trampoline. So in life, and even like when we are looking at even consciousness, first we have to go down into the delta frequencies to be able to jump up and then go into the gamma frequencies. It's not possible to go into transcendental experiences or mystical experiences directly from the beta state of mind. The beta frequencies, I don't know if how many of you have attended the other talks, but the beta frequencies are when we are talking like this. You have to have beta frequencies in your brainwave pattern. Now, if you think that in from this state of consciousness, you're going to be able to go into a transcendental state, that's not possible. First, you have to slow yourself down. We have to go into alpha, then we have to go into theta, then we have to go into delta. We have to be in that delta. We have to allow that release to take place. We have to become lighter. Once we release everything, we connect with the whole, because delta frequencies connects us with the universal consciousness, and then that propels us into the gamma, which will allow us to reach transcendental states. So going down is extremely important in any kind of growth process.
For me, this is symbolic of what happens preceding a shift. In a metaphorical sense, getting down can mean that we are low enough to possess the energy needed to change life direction.
So, okay, again, when we are low, we see that things are not working. So, I understand that I need to shift my direction. The direction I'm going in is not giving me value, it is not working for me.
Every fall has within it the potential to move us to a higher place. It may be necessary to get down and dirty in the dark night of the soul in order to free ourselves from the grip of a well established ego. Hidden in all misfortune is good fortune, is a Tao concept that seems to support the value of those times in life when we experienced a fall. Without that particular misfortune, good fortune is unavailable.
So, now when we look at life, when we look in hindsight, most of the time you will find in your life that there were certain incidences which took place. And if those incidents didn't take place, then you would not be what you are. And when you are in that incident, when that is happening, you think this is the worst time in my life. But in hindsight, you'll find that those were the best times, because that is what put you into the right direction and made you get on the path that you were meant to be taking.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross puts these events in the category of nature's work. Should you shield the canyons from the windstorms, you would never see the beauty of their carvings. The windstorms of life are potentially meaningful events, and we can use them to propel ourselves to higher places. In fact, It is my contention that the bigger the purpose we signed up for in life, the bigger and harder the falls we encounter will be.
Okay, so Elizabeth Ross Kubler was one of the most prolific and world-renowned investigators of death. Okay, he has written a lot of books. We have, I think, 7 or 8 of his books in the library, if I'm not mistaken. And he also worked a lot with Robert Monroe. And ultimately, what happened was that they created a series. It was called the Going Home series. We've not used those tracks over here, but it prepares a person when they are transiting. It creates the roadmap for them to understand that when they transcend, what they need to do. So there are two sets, one for the caregivers and one for the person who is going to transcend. So again, we've experienced focus 10. So in that experience, you go into focus 10, focus 12, focus 15. You do that entire thing. It's literally like a gateway voyage program, but tuned towards making you understand that what are you going to experience once you transit. And then he says here, if you shield the canyons from the windstorms, you would never see the beauty of the carvings. Now, when you look at children growing today, the more overprotective we become of the children, the less we prepare them for life. Because the mistakes that they make, the falls that they have, that is what creates metal in them. And if we want to protect them from everything, then we are actually creating a problem in their life, not a solution. Unfortunately, today's parents have become overprotective, which is something that we should pay attention to. Okay. And again, over here, he says the bigger the fall the person has, the more life experience that he has come here to experience. So again, when we are going into these altered states, people are saying in many of the books that the earth plane is a very popular joint, simply because you can learn a lot in a short period of time over here. What we learn in our one lifetime would take decades and decades and decades in an altered state of consciousness. But over here, we learn it very quickly because lessons are easy to come by and really beautiful to learn. In the Gateway Voyage, we play a track. It's called the Kernel. I don't know how many of you will remember it, but it's very powerful. What he says is so fantastic. It's not funny, but he doesn't allow us to share it. So he's signed an agreement with the institute that it'll only be played in the Gateway Voyage. But that's something worth watching.
A mild heart attack helped me become more caring towards the suffering of others. Being in a series of foster homes taught me self-reliance as a young boy, which consequently led me to become a teacher of self-reliance. A deeply painful separation from my wife allowed me to write from a more compassionate heart. I came here to accomplish big things, you see. Therefore, I am not at all surprised when the challenges and the falls come in big doses. In fact, I now feel that any big challenge is an opportunity to grow to a higher spiritual level where gratitude gradually replaces remorse.
So again, the moment you change your perspective, so he says over here, where gratitude gradually replaces remorse. So if I can find something I can be grateful for in any situation, I will automatically shift my perspective and start learning from that, which will result in my growth. Okay, so naturally, all the life experiences that you have made you what you are. Now you can become bitter by those life experiences, or you can be grateful to those life experiences so that you have grown. Now, the incident may be the same, but what is the perspective with which you are looking at it? That is what actually creates the shift.
I absolutely love this Rumi observation, which reveals what I consider to be an essential truth. The spiritual path wrecks the body and afterwards restores it to health. It destroys the house to unearth the treasure and with that treasure builds it better than before.
Okay, so in shamanism, there is a technique, and it's a meditation where you go and ask your power friends or your power animals and your helping spirits to dismember you. So literally, the experience is as if your flesh and your body is getting torn out, and then they restore it. So they remove all the stuff that is not required, and then they restore it again. It is a fantastic kind of an experience where you actually feel that some shift has taken place in your life. So this is exactly what he's saying over here. First you need to destroy something and then allow it to get recreated.
This has been my experience as I look back at how I made a change in direction that shifted from ambition to meaning. All of the falls unearthed a treasure in me that wouldn't have been usable had my house not been destroyed. Those windstorms of life helped me carve the body of work that millions of readers and listeners appreciate.
So this is like, what happened to the movie director in the film. The moment he shifted his perspective, he had lost his entire job. But when he started paying attention and looking what was happening around him, he found there was so much beauty in the place. There were so many beautiful things happening that he literally said, I can create an entire movie out of what is happening around me. So he started noticing things. Okay. So the more aware you become, the better you are at making the shift.
This has been my experience. Each sorry. Each of the characteristic characters in the movie, The Shift, experiences some ego unearthing. Sorry. Each of the characters in the movie, The Shift, experiences some ego unearthing preceding their own shift to a more meaningful life. David, the filmmaker, almost collapses as he is dealt a blow that destroys his visions of success.
So again, if you look, that David, that filmmaker, he had pegged everything to that movie, and that movie started to define him. Now, when that movie was taken away, it was like as if the floor was removed from his feet, from under his feet.
Chad, the CEO, faces the wrath of his pregnant wife, risking his marriage over his ego stunts. And then there's Quinn and Jason, a couple of two young boys. Jason grapples with the issue of becoming a temporary homemaker in order to assist Quinn in fulfilling her dharma as an artist. The fact is that all of these falls, minor or catastrophic, are experiences that can be tipping points that elevate these individuals' consciousness to a place where significance and purpose are the touchstones of their lives.
So again, all of them experienced a shift.
Each of these components of ego make entirely different demands than our source of being does. Spirit calls us home to a perfect alignment with our Creator. Ego is moving at a high speed in the opposite direction. We must get better acquainted with spirit if we wish to make a U-turn while we are still alive and fully experience the afternoon of life.
So again, spirit takes us into the flow, takes us into equanimity, takes us into ease. Ego will always take us into disease.
Preparing to make the U-turn. The Bhagavad Gita tells us we are born into the world of nature. Our second birth is into the world of spirit. Sorry.
You want to have some water?
Yeah, just
Sumitra, are
one.
you uncomfortable?
Gita tells us we are born into the world of nature. Our second birth is into the world of spirit. Taming the influence of the ego is the beginning of that second birth. By taming the ego, we elicit the support and assistance of, sorry, one second, just a second. The Bhagavad Gita tells us we are born into the world of nature. Our second birth is into the world of spirit. Taming the influence of the ego is the beginning of that second birth. By taming the ego, we elicit the support and assistance of our originating spirit, and we come to notice synchronicities happening in our life. The people we need appear, circumstances come together in a way that assists us on our dharma path. Financing becomes available that was never there before, and so on.
So again, as soon as we let go, we stop being selfish. We start connecting with the whole. Then automatically the magic starts to happen. Whatever we need will start to appear. Whatever, because again we are in the flow. So everything just falls into place.
In the words of Patanjali, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you have ever dreamed yourself to be.
So now, when we are operating out of ego, we are operating out of that small conscious awareness. When we get into the flow, we start operating with the big conscious awareness. So you automatically will get access to faculties which you were not aware of previously. Okay, this is a given. That's what we say, that as soon as you're going into these states of consciousness of F10, F12, etc., your intuitive ability, your sense of calm, everything starts to get enhanced.
In the words of Patanjali, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. This great Hindu philosopher is referring to what happens when we move into a spiritual mindset rather than an ego dominated one. That which previously appeared to be non existent suddenly comes alive.
Again, this is important. That which appeared to be non-existent suddenly comes alive. Why? Because you've stilled your mind. The ego is constantly chatting, it's constantly chattering. Now when there is silence, then every stimulus that is coming into that still pond will start, you will start becoming aware of it. So automatically your awareness, your conscious awareness starts to get enhanced.
This is the result of reversing the direction of life and knowing where we are headed to. The title of this chapter. The most important thing we can do to diffuse the influence of ego is to proclaim ourselves ready. Remember the ancient saying that instructs, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. The teachers and teachings are always there throughout the entire span of our life. But when ego is running things, those teachers go unnoticed. Once we truly acknowledge our readiness to live a life on purpose and filled with meaning, there's very little to do. We begin living in a different world than we experience in our ego-directed persona. As I've written and said many times, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change.
So what does this mean? When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. So what does this imply? It clearly implies that if I shift my perspective about something, then automatically everything around that thing changes. Okay. Now, most of the time when we are operating from ego, we are not willing to listen. Okay. We are only wanting to talk. But a true student is willing to listen, is willing to be present, is willing to understand, okay, is willing to question, not tark, not kutark, but to do tark, to ask the question, the relevant and the right question, so that they can understand what the concepts are all about. And any teacher worth its salt will always be open to receiving questions. When a teacher is operating out of ego, then the person will not be ready to answer questions and will be stuck with his or her point of view. So there is a very, very good relationship between a student and a teacher. But whenever we are open to receiving, as we've said before, everything that we need for our growth is actually available for us all the time. So if I'm willing to see, if I'm willing to become aware, then whatever I need is automatically available. So when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, because the teacher is always there. The teacher is, it's not that the teacher is not there.
Briefly summarized, here's what happens when ego does a U turn and heads in the direction of our place of origination. The 7-step summary of our U turn. We shift to personal empowerment. Our ego self has always focused on external power. As we move towards spirit, though, we replace ego's need to influence in external situations or other people with a preference for personal empowerment. We stop fighting ego's endless battles and instead shift to meaning.
So what does this mean? We are not bothered about what the other guy is saying. We want to see what will give us satisfaction, not from an egoistic state of mind, but from a holistic state of mind. What will elevate our consciousness? What will put us into the right path? We start focusing on all that. What has value to me? What has meaning to me? From a state of love and compassion. Okay. So we shift and operate from the right side of the grid, not from the left side of the grid. When we start that shift from ego to wholeness, the left to the right, and then we start looking at personal environment, growth. What is good for me? I will stop doing things which are disempowering for me. So automatically the stuff which doesn't work for me will start getting knocked out. It will start getting dropped from our lives.
We do this through conscious, compassionate curiosity and caring first and foremost for our inner self. Non interference becomes a higher priority than being right or dominating others.
So again, self-care, loving ourselves is extremely important. Stopping criticizing and judging ourselves. We are our own biggest critics and our own biggest judges. We need to drop it. We need to start allowing things. If the universe is manifesting something for us, we must say yes. Okay, there's this movie called Yes Man. Maybe we'll watch it one day. But saying yes is so important. If you really notice what is happening in your life, most of the time we are in resistance. We are saying no, can't, won't. All these words are constantly being said. And that is what creates the disharmony in our lives. The moment we start allowing things to happen, things will just magically start happening.
We see ourselves connected to everyone. Ego feels separate and distinct from others, a being unto itself. As we move back to spirit, we recognize our connectedness. The essence of living a life on purpose is to think like God thinks, and the creative source of all life is just that, responsible for all life. We all share the same source and have the same destiny. Seeing ourselves as a part of everyone eliminates the need to compete with anyone.
So if everyone is me, then I don't need to compete with anyone. And if everyone is me, then I need to care for everyone. So again, when you start going on the path, you'll start thinking holistically. You will start giving rather than taking. And the more you give, the more the universe will give back to you. But then again, if you do, what is the state of consciousness with which you are doing something? Is it from the left side of the grid or the right side of the grid? Now, if I get into my mind, the more I do, the more the universe will give me, then again, it's a transaction. You should give for the joy of giving. And as soon as you start doing that, then the universe will automatically respond. But you have to trust the process and you have to allow it with love and compassion to manifest in your life.
3. We are motivated by ethics, serenity, and quality of life. Ego is motivated by external achievement, performance, and acquisitions. As we move back to spirit, we shift our focus to internal pursuits. Our preparation for living a life of purpose involves a major shift in attitude in the direction of feeling peaceful, being honest, and assisting others.
So if you see Joe, the owner of the resort, he was always peaceful. He was always doing for others. He didn't say no to anything. He was willing to do anything, and everything was just flowing around him. And the beauty of that place was maybe because of Joe, because he created that environment in that environment so that everyone could, whoever came there, came and had a good time. So again, he is not motivated by external achievement. He's happy where he is, and he's just doing and going with the flow. So serenity, equanimity, and self-love, which radiates externally ultimately, becomes the basis of what you're living, the basis of how you are living life.
4. We shift to the possibility, even the expectation of miracles being a part of life. As we move towards originating spirit, ego's investment in a scientific cause and effect interpretation of life is diluted. We acknowledge the presence of the mysterious and unfathomable, and we relinquish skepticism by relying less on our senses and much more on our intuitive knowing.
So what does this mean? When we are doing ego, it is always transactional based. If I do something, I should get something back in return. But as soon as we shift our states of consciousness, then it becomes just a giving. You don't do a transaction, and then you live life intuitively. You get a sense, it's a tasir, that okay, this is what I should be doing right now. This is the right path for me. Logically, it may be the last thing that you will do, but when you start trusting that intuition, and I'm telling you this by personal experience, you'll find that everything will start to fall in place. But you have to drop the ego for that. You have to drop the selfishness for that. If you're operating out of selfishness, then you can never connect to that intuitive state of consciousness. It is extremely important for you to start becoming less selfish. Start looking at doing good for others. And the moment you start doing that, the magic will again start happening.
5. We pursue a meditation practice. Ego eschews the practice of meditation and often labels it as a waste of time or even worse, lunacy. Shifting to our source of being leads us to seek silence to consciously contact God as a natural component of a meaningful life.
So now when we are going into a meditative state, okay, we go into a stillness of mind. But ego depends on the mind chatter. If the chatter is not there, the ego is not there. So the ego is very, very afraid of a meditative state of consciousness where a stillness starts to come into your mind. And then you are open to intuition. Then you will not listen to ego. Okay, so that's why ego is always against meditation. So anyone who's operating in a materialistic state of consciousness will always say meditation is a waste of time. But once you get the chaska of it, once you get the feel of it, you will find that the happiness, the peace, the contentment that you get out of that meditative state, you can never get out of an ego state of consciousness.
6. We begin to recognize ourselves in nature's beauty and intricacy. Ego's interest in contemplating the beauty of nature is minimal. When we journey back in the direction of spirit, our interest in the miracles that appear in the natural world is endless. Out of this grows our preference to live in harmony with this universe rather than to exert influence and power over it.
So as soon as we are shifting into these states, okay, of altered states of consciousness, our perception increases, and then we can start perceiving beauty in everything that is around us. Okay, and that when we connect with that beauty, it adds to the shift in the state of consciousness. So the more we appreciate beauty, the more in appreciation we get, the more in the right side of the grid we get, and the more exalted our state of consciousness becomes. So you'll find that most spiritually oriented people are in awe of nature. They will be in awe of all these small things that happen. They will feel gratitude and feel the blessings that they are receiving in everything that is happening to them, whether it's eating a morsel of food, a book has come into their hand, or they are in a car, or they are talking to someone, or they are seeing something. In everything, gratitude becomes a very, very integral part of their state of being.
7. We are less judgmental and we easily understand and forgive. Ego is rather adamant about the importance of seeking revenge. Shifting to source causes us to enjoy opportunities to practice forgiveness. Pursuing and achieving vengeance, retaliation, and reprisal prevent us from feeling purposeful and living a life of meaning. We become truly sensitive to the edict that we don't define others by our judgments. We are simply defining ourselves as people who need to judge.
Okay, so again, when we go back into the four agreements, one of the agreements was do not make assumptions. Now, whenever we make a judgment, it is an assumption. So, the less assumptions we have and the more direct experience we have about something will automatically make us more present. So, we need to understand and put ourselves into the shoes of the other guy before making a judgment about what is happening. There was this story where it was going on in the WhatsApp. I don't know how many of you all may have seen it. That there was a scene, a ship was sinking, and there was one last lifeboat which was there, and there was a husband and wife pair, and only one person could get onto that lifeboat. Now, what happened was that instead of putting his wife into the lifeboat, the husband jumped into the lifeboat himself. Now, anyone watching that scene would say, what a man! He did not put his wife there and he jumped into the lifeboat himself. But that is an assumption that was made. Okay. Now, what was the actual story was the wife was suffering from cancer, and this was the last trip that they were taking because this was the last time his wife could have gone, and they had two small children. Now, if he would have put the wife into the lifeboat, the wife would have passed on in maybe 6 months or 1 year or whatever, and the children would have been left parentless. So the wife and the husband decided that the husband should go on to the lifeboat and not the wife. Now, again, assumptions can make things very twisted. So unless we have the data, unless we have the proper information, we must not make assumptions. That's why gossiping is the worst thing that you can do to yourself, because it's a total waste of time. And most gossip, if you really look at it, is depleting because you are judging the other guy and putting the other guy down. Let's finish this paragraph.
These 7 distinctions between ego's ambitions and a desire to live a life of meaning could easily be extended to 70 times 7. Essentially, the process of shifting to meaning involves reconsidering our role in this magnificent, mysterious universe from a spiritual perspective. We recognize our longing for more significance and purpose and realize that ego isn't capable of fulfilling that yearning. Whether personally articulated or not, we cannot achieve authenticity from the false self, which is ego.
So the false self, ego is actually the facade that we are creating because that's not our true self. Okay. So we need to drop that facade to actually create meaning in our life. The more authentic we can become, rather than looking good, let's start feeling good.
This is entertainingly illustrated by the personal stories of David, Chad, and Quinn in the movie version of The Shift. We see them in their frustration of endlessly striving, which is the way of ambition in an ego dominated life. and watch them as they shift to meaning and consequently discover the joy of arriving. In the film, ego loses its influence as each of these characters tires of continually striving and never arriving.
So again, the David, I think he was the the real estate guy. He was
No,
constantly
yeah, sorry, yes.
whatever, whichever one. The real estate guy was constantly striving for bigger projects. Me, and then he shifted. Chad, he wanted that big project. He thought that that big project is only what makes him. He wanted his name to be in the big piece of the movie making industry, not realizing that that was not meaningful for him. And as far as the lady is concerned, she was so fixed on doing a good job of being a mother. With that ambition, she lost the sense of her entire state of being, her art. She dropped everything because of that ambition to that label that I am a good mother. So automatically they were not happy. All three of them were ultimately not happy, and they were getting tired with what we do. So when we are in the flow, you will find that you don't get tired so easily. You are able to work tirelessly. Whatever you are doing becomes a joy, not a pain.
Chad was the real estate and David was the filmmaker.
Yeah, that's okay, whichever.
A signal that the two dimension of the shift is upon us is that we, like the film's three central characters, begin to tire of the angst of continually striving and never arriving. Our view of our world changes as we permit quantum moments to get and then hold our attention.
So again, we are constantly striving to arrive, not knowing that we have already arrived. Because wherever we are, that is the only moment that we have in our hand, and that is where we are. That is what is real, and that is what we need to associate with. That is what we need to connect with. The moment we do that, then everything starts to shift.
Should we stop here?
I think we should stop. Anyone, anything?